Some dangers don't scream. They trail behind you, night after night. Some people look completely ordinary, yet it makes you so afraid you don't dare turn around. And there are moments when you realize that if no one steps in tonight, your life could veer in a direction you can never come back from. If you've ever believed that nothing has happened yet means you're safe, then this story may make you think again. Some people live among us every day, yet they are almost invisible. Not because they don't exist, but because society has grown used to not seeing them for far too long. Emily Carter was one of them. 24 years old, a night shift waitress at Maple Road Diner, a small roadside restaurant where the old neon lights have flickered on and off for more than 30 years. If you drove past it at midnight, you'd think it was just a temporary stop, a place to grab coffee, eat something quick, and get back on the road. But to Emily, it was her entire world. Emily wasn't the kind of person who lit up a room when she walked in. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't draw attention. She didn't try to be the center of anything. But if you stayed long enough, you'd notice something very different. She remembered your name. Not polite, surface-level remembering. Real remembering. She remembered whether you drank your coffee black or with milk, whether you liked your eggs fried or scrambled, that you once said you had a job interview that day, that you were worried about your elderly father back home. Emily had a way of making people feel seen, something increasingly rare in this rushed world. During the day, Emily was a community college student majoring in social work. She once told a regular customer, "I'm not good at saving people like a hero, but I want to be there when someone needs to be heard." In the morning, she went to class. In the afternoon, she caught up on a few hours of sleep. In the evening, from 4 o'clock until nearly midnight, Emily tied her hair back, put on her apron, and became part of Maple Road Diner. Her life wasn't easy. 2 jobs, tuition, rent, bus fare. But it was stable. And sometimes, stability is the most precious thing there is. Maple Road Diner wasn't glamorous. The tiled floor was chipped. The ceiling fans turned slowly and creaked. The red vinyl booths had faded with time. But some things never changed. The diner sat on the stretch of road connecting 2 small towns. Busy enough during the day. At night, quiet, still, and empty. Winter night shifts were always the hardest. Darkness came early. Wind cut through the parking lot. Streetlights illuminated only part of the space. After 9 p.m., customers thinned out. A truck driver is stopping for coffee. A couple heading home late. A man is sitting alone in the corner. Emily was used to that silence, until it started to feel no longer harmless. 3 weeks earlier, Emily noticed a new man. At first, there was nothing unusual. He came in alone, perfectly normal, sat at a table in the back, also normal, ordered coffee and a sandwich, completely normal. But one thing caught Emily's attention: the way he sat. He didn't look at the menu, didn't spend much time on his phone, didn't glance around like someone looking for a seat. He sat upright, his eyes taking in the entire diner, watching. Emily had done this job long enough to understand people. She knew when someone wanted to talk, and when someone wanted to be left alone. This man wanted to be left alone, but his eyes did not. Every time Emily looked up, those eyes were already there. Not rude, not inappropriate, not eager in a cheap, obvious way, just patient. Patient in a cold, unsettling way. That night, he stayed for 5 hours, drank 3 cups of coffee, left when Emily's shift ended, didn't leave a tip. Emily forgot about him as soon as she locked up, until 3 days later. He came back, still alone, still coffee, still, sitting for hours, Only one thing was different. His table was closer, and his gaze lasted longer. Slowly, very slowly, the presence of that man began to change the way Emily existed inside her own workplace. She walked faster past his table, lowered her head more when mopping the floor, smiled less. There were moments when Emily felt as though she was being watched, even with her back turned. It was hard to explain the feeling. Not outright fear, but a quiet pressure weighing down every movement. By the second week, he began coming every night Emily worked. Not earlier, not later, like a schedule. Emily started to recognize his car. An old, dark-colored sedan, always parked at the edge of the lot, where the lights didn't reach. One evening when Emily clocked out, she saw that the car was still running. Lights off, no one is getting out, just sitting there, waiting. The bus stop was less than 100 meters from the diner. During the day, the walk meant nothing, but at night, in the cold wind, it felt much longer. Emily walked quickly. Her heart is pounding. She heard a car rolling behind her, not speeding up, not passing her, just following. Close enough for her to know she wasn't imagining it, far enough that he could always say, just a coincidence. When Emily finally got on the bus, her hands were shaking so severely that she could barely punch her ticket. Through the rear window, she saw the sedan following the bus for 3 stops. That night, Emily didn't sleep. The next morning, she told her manager. She kept her voice calm, didn't cry, didn't exaggerate. She just told the truth. The manager sighed. Did he pay? Yes. Did he bother other customers? No, but he bothers me. Emily, we can't ban someone just because they look. The words landed like a very light slap, so light that no one thought it would hurt. But it did. Emily went to the police. The officer listened, took careful notes, very polite, then said the sentence Emily feared most. There's been no criminal act. If he threatens you, touches you, or approaches you outside the diner, call immediately. In other words, wait until something bad happens. Emily walked out of the police station feeling like she had just been abandoned inside her own life story. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of living with the feeling of being watched. 3 weeks of stepping into the parking lot with her heart racing. 3 weeks of asking herself, what if tonight is the night he takes one more step? Emily didn't know that someone else was watching too. Not to take, but to protect. And that person was the one she least expected. There was one thing Emily began to understand very clearly after those 3 weeks. Fear. It is not always significant enough to be heard. Not because it isn't real, but because it hasn't left a bruise yet. After reporting to the police, Emily returned to Maple Road Diner like any other night. She still tied on her apron, still smiled when customers ordered, still poured coffee with steady hands, at least on the outside. But inside, everything had changed. Every time the diner door opened, her heart gave a slight jolt. Every time she heard a car stop in the parking lot, her eyes instinctively went to the window. Emily began mapping the space in her head. Which tables were closest to the exits? Which ones sat in the shadows? How many steps were there from the register to the back door? She didn't realize she was doing it until it became instinct. The man, he kept coming. Regularly. Precisely. Like a wound clock. It was no longer random, no longer a coincidence. Some nights, Emily tried switching shifts with a coworker. He didn't show up. The next night, when she returned, he was there again. As if he knew. No words, no contact, just presence. And And within that silence, Emily felt herself slowly losing control. The manager didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. To him, Emily was still doing her job. Customers still came back. Revenue hadn't dropped. Everything looked fine on paper. And that was the problem. Systems only see what can be measured. No one measures fear. Some nights, Emily went home and sat in the dark for a long time. No lights, no TV, just sitting there, listening to cars pass outside, wondering if any of them would stop. She blamed herself. Am I exaggerating? Am I too sensitive? Is he just lonely? Society is very good at making victims doubt their own instincts. Meanwhile, in another corner of the diner, there was a man who kept sitting there. Jack Bear Reynolds. He didn't talk much, didn't make friends, didn't draw attention, but Jack had a habit that set him apart. He observed. Not out of curiosity, but because he had seen the worst things happen and knew that tragedy rarely begins with a scream. It begins with silence. Jack noticed how the man chose his seat, always a place with a full view of the room. Jack noticed that look, a look not searching for connection, but for control. Jack noticed Emily changing. At first, barely, then more clearly. She walked faster, spoke less, and every time her shift ended, she looked toward the parking lot before checking the clock. Jack had seen that before, on his sister's face, many years ago. Some memories never leave. Jack remembered that night vividly. The phone call at 2 a.m, his sister's voice shattered, chaos on the other end of the line. When Jack reached the hospital, his sister was wrapped in bandages, 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and scars no amount of time could erase. It all began with moments of just looking. Moments of just being there. Moments when everyone said, nothing has happened yet. Jack had been to war. He knew something law books never taught. When a threat becomes clear enough to be illegal, it's usually already too late. On the 3rd night of that week, Jack noticed the sedan parked in a new spot, no longer at the edge of the lot, no longer hiding in the shadows. It was parked right near the bus stop under the streetlight. No need to hide anymore. Jack understood this was an escalation, and this escalation was not accidental. Emily didn't know what Jack was seeing. She only knew that that night the fear inside her felt different. Not vague, not dull, but sharp, clear, like her body was trying to say something no one else was willing to hear. She checked the clock. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes left. 13 minutes before she had to lock the door. 13 minutes before she would have to walk past that car. Emily took a deep breath and realized her hands were shaking. She looked around the diner. An elderly couple sharing an apple pie. A truck driver is drinking coffee at the counter. And Jack, sitting alone at table 7. The man most people would avoid. The man who, if she passed him on the street, Emily would change sides. But there was something about Jack that didn't make her feel threatened. He didn't look at her like an object, didn't look at her like prey. He looked at her like a human being trying to keep her balance. Emily stood behind the counter for a long time, struggling with herself. If she spoke up, she might look weak. If she stayed silent, she didn't know what would happen once she stepped outside. There are moments in life when there is only one right choice, even if it isn't safe. Emily picked up the coffee pot, walked toward table 7. Her voice was so quiet that only one person could hear it. I'm sorry to bother you, but that man, he won't stop watching me. I don't know what to do anymore. Emily didn't dare look Jack in the eye. She braced herself for discomfort, for doubt, or worse, indifference. But what happened was completely different. Jack looked at her. Not a glance, not a curious stare. He looked carefully, as if he were confirming something he had known for a long time. In his eyes, Emily didn't see pity, only trust. And then Jack stood up, not in a hurry, not loudly. He stood. Emily hadn't yet understood what was happening when Jack stepped away from the table, and in that moment, the man at the other table lifted his head. His eyes met Jack's, and for the first time since Emily had seen him, that smile disappeared. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Emily stood behind the counter, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid others might hear it. She didn't know what Jack was going to do. She only knew one thing. Everything had passed the point of no return, and whatever happened next tonight would not end like them. Nights before. There was a very brief moment when the entire room seemed to stop breathing. No one spoke. No one moved. Only eyes. The eyes of Jack Reynolds, steady, deep, without anger, and the eyes of the other man, for the first time, no longer in control. Emily stood behind the counter, both hands clenched around the coffee pot. She didn't know what Jack was going to do. She didn't know whom she had just pulled into trouble. But there was one thing she felt with absolute clarity. She was no longer alone. Jack walked slowly down the aisle between the tables. Not rushed, not aggressive. Each step carried weight. The other man remained seated, but his back no longer rested comfortably against the chair. That familiar smile, the smile Emily had seen for 3 weeks, was gone. In its place was something else. Alertness. Jack didn't stand over him. He didn't look down at him. He sat down across from him. That action, simple, ordinary, completely changed the atmosphere of the room. Diner. This wasn't a threat. This was a confrontation. Jack looked directly at him, his voice low and even. "You've been coming here for 3 weeks." The man smirked slightly, trying to recover his composure. "I like the coffee here." Jack gave a very slight nod. "You come on the exact nights she works. You sit for hours, and you follow her to the bus stop." A pause. Emily held her breath. The man leaned back, his voice a little higher than before. "Are you accusing me of something? I haven't done anything wrong." Jack didn't respond right away. He looked at him for a few more seconds, as if deciding which words to speak first. Then Jack said very slowly, "I'm not accusing you. I'm telling you, I see you." From behind the counter, Emily felt the shift. Not absolute safety, but something else, a reversal. For the first time, the man was no longer the only one watching. Jack leaned forward slightly, not enough to be a threat, but enough to erase the safe distance the man thought he had. "You park a dark-colored sedan at the edge of the lot. Lights off, engine running. You followed the bus for 3 stops. The man's face went pale, very quickly, but not quickly enough to escape Jack's eyes. You don't have proof?" Jack nodded. "That's right. And that's why you're still sitting here." That sentence wasn't angry, but it sent a chill through Emily. Jack leaned back, his voice still calm. "Albany, 3 years ago. Portland, 2 years ago." The man flinched. What are you talking about?" Jack met his eyes. "Jessica. Emily. And one more, who never went to the police." The names weren't spoken loudly, not dramatically, but they landed on the table like something heavy. The man opened his mouth, then I closed it again. For the first time since Emily had met him, she saw genuine fear on his face. "You can't know those things. They're not public," Jack replied. "You're wrong. They weren't remembered, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist." Emily didn't understand everything Jack was saying, but she understood one thing. The man in front of them no longer held control. The diner door opened, a small bell rang. Two men walked in, leather jackets, patches like Jack's. They didn't look around, didn't speak. They walked straight over and sat down on either side of the table. No one touched anyone. No one made a threat, but their presence said everything. The man glanced at them, then at Jack, then toward the door. Emily saw it. He was calculating an escape. Jack stood up and stepped into the aisle. He didn't spread his arms, didn't raise a fist. He just stood there. "You're not following her tonight, and you're not following her any other night." The man snarled. "You don't have the right to keep me here." "I'll call the police." Jack took out his phone and placed it on the table. "Go ahead. Tell them why you're here. Tell them about Albany. Tell them about Portland." The silence stretched. The man stared at the phone as if it were something that could bite him. Then he sat back down. Emily felt her knees weaken. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew that she was witnessing a moment she would probably never forget. Jack returned to the table and sat across from the man. His voice dropped lower. "You have two choices." No raised voice, no dramatics, just truth. One, you leave this town. You don't come back. And you understand that from now on, you are no longer invisible. The man swallowed. Two, Jack continued. You stay. You face what you've done. And you change. The man laughed, but it was dry and hollow. You think I'm going to turn myself in? Jack shook his head. No. I think you're too tired to keep running. Jack pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table. The screen lit up. Two women's faces appeared. No anger, no screaming, just eyes that had once been afraid. Emily covered her mouth. She didn't know who they were, but she understood they had once been like her. The man lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake, not because he was being forced, but because there was nowhere left to hide. In that moment, no one in the diner spoke. There was no victory, no applause, only truth, bare, heavy, and impossible to turn away from. Jack spoke very softly. This isn't about punishment. It's about ending it. Emily stood there feeling as though she had just stepped through an invisible door, a door between fear and being believed. Outside, the sedan was still parked under the streetlight, but this time, it was no longer a promise of danger. It was a sign that everything had changed. That night didn't end with the sound of police sirens. There were no handcuffs, no flashing red and blue lights tearing through the parking lot. It ended in silence. A silence very different from the nights before. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of something finally being set down. A weight that had pressed on Emily's chest for 3 straight weeks. When things finally settled, Jack walked back to the counter. He didn't speak loudly, didn't explain, didn't ask for thanks. He asked only a straightforward question, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. How are you getting home? It took Emily a few seconds to understand the question, as if her mind were still moving slower than her heartbeat. The bus, sir? Jack nodded. Not tonight. It wasn't a command, just an arrangement. The 2 men in leather jackets stood up first. They didn't look at Emily. They didn't want her to feel she owed anyone anything. They stepped outside, standing at just the proper distance. Not intrusive, not performative. Jack turned back to the man who had been following Emily. There was no confrontation left, no pressure, just one final, quiet reminder. You leave before we do. And you understand what that means. The man nodded. No argument, no challenge. The sedan started and pulled out of the parking lot. Didn't look back. Only when the diner door was locked did Emily realize she was shaking. Not from the cold, but because her body was finally allowing itself to release everything it had been holding. Jack stood outside waiting, not rushing her, not asking questions, just waiting until Emily stepped out. On the ride home, Emily sat in the back seat of Jack's old pickup truck. The two bikers rode ahead. No music played, no one spoke. Wind slipped through the slightly open window. The smell of gasoline, old leather, and winter night air. Emily looked out the window and realized she had forgotten what this felt like. The feeling of moving through darkness without having to look back. When the truck stopped in front of Emily's small apartment, Jack said only, "Go inside. When you've locked the door, turn on the light." Emily did as she was told. From inside the apartment, she looked down. The three men were still there, waiting. They stayed until the light came on. Then they turned away. No goodbye, no promise to see each other again. Just done. That night, Emily slept straight through until morning. No jolting awake, no dreams of the parking lot, no imagined sounds. When she woke up, she felt something strange, as if something inside her had shifted. Not disappeared completely, but no longer frozen in the same place. In the days that followed, Emily kept going to work. Maple Road Diner stayed the same old booths, the same old neon lights. But one thing never came back. The dark-colored sedan. Not that night, not the next night, not ever again. Emily began to understand something. Danger doesn't disappear because it's weak. It disappears because it's been looked at directly. A few weeks later, Jack returned to the diner, still sitting alone, still ordering the same thing. Emily brought his coffee to the table. This time, she spoke first. "Thank you." Jack looked up. He didn't deflect it. He didn't take credit. He just said, "Anyone in that situation deserves to be believed." Those words stayed with Emily for a long time. Emily began to see her work differently. The stories the regulars told, the worries spoken between sips of coffee. She realized she wasn't just listening. She was holding people up. And sometimes, people only need a little support to keep from falling. One quiet evening, when the diner was nearly empty, Emily opened her laptop and looked again at her course program. Social work. She had once chosen it vaguely. Now she hadn't. She knew exactly why. Not to be a hero, not to rescue anyone, but to stand beside them before they were pushed to the edge. Time passed. Emily graduated. She went to work for an organization that supports victims. She helped people write reports, prepare paperwork, find safe places to stay. And most importantly, she told them the words she had once needed to hear the most. You're not crazy. You're not exaggerating. And you're not alone. And Jack? He was still Jack. Still leather jackets, still quiet. But if you asked people in that town, they would tell you this. Some nights, you'd see a few motorcycles parked silently at the edge of a lot. No trouble, no interference, just presence, like a reminder. We're watching. Emily and Jack texted from time to time, nothing long, nothing deep. I'm okay. Good. That was enough. One afternoon, Emily stayed behind in the diner after her shift. Sunlight cut through the window, falling across old scratches on the tabletop. She thought about that night. If she hadn't stepped forward, if Jack had looked away, no one knows what would have happened. And this is the most frightening part. This story doesn't have a neat ending. No one is sentenced, no titles are given, no applause. Only one certainty. A life did not turn down a different path, and very possibly many other lives didn't either. Before leaving the diner that day, Emily wrote a short line in her notebook. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is speaking up when silence is no longer safe. She closed the notebook, stepped outside, and this time, the darkness did not follow her anymore. Some stories happen when the lights are turned off and the doors are locked. But the truth is, they only begin to live after that moment. Emily once believed that if she could get through that night, everything would return to normal. She would go back to work, carry coffee again, smile at the regulars again. Life would go on. And it did go on, but not in the way Emily expected. One morning, as Emily stood waiting for the bus like she did every day, the wind was cold. The streets were still quiet. She realized she was standing straighter, not constantly turning her head, not gripping her bag tightly. The feeling came very gently, but when she recognized it, Emily had been standing there for a long time, not out of fear, but because, for the first time, her body was no longer preparing for danger. She had forgotten this feeling for so long that she didn't recognize it when it returned. Emily continued working at Maple Road Diner until she completed her studies. The diner stayed the same. The regulars stayed the same, but Emily did not. She began noticing small things she had once overlooked. A young woman sitting alone in the corner, constantly glancing toward the door. A middle-aged woman lowers her voice when mentioning her husband. Eyes that couldn't quite meet another's. Emily didn't press. She didn't intervene too quickly. She simply stayed. Because she understood that sometimes the first thing a person needs is not advice, but someone who believes that what they're feeling is real. A few months later, Emily officially began working for a victim support organization. The job wasn't like the movies. There were no victorious moments, no climactic scenes, only paperwork, phone calls in the middle of the night, stories that repeated themselves heartbreakingly. But Emily did the work well, not because she was stronger than anyone else, but because she had once stood in that exact place, the place of someone being watched, doubted, told, "Nothing has happened yet." Emily didn't tell her story to everyone. She said it only when necessary, and every time she did, she didn't mention the bikers, didn't mention the confrontation. She said only one thing: don't wait until it's too late to trust your own instincts. Jack continued living his life as before. No interviews, no social media posts, no public thanks. If you asked him about that night, he would only say, "I didn't do anything special." But sometimes, what's special is not turning away. There was a short video someone had recorded from the distance in the diner that night. Just a few dozen seconds, blurry footage, no clear audio. You could only see a man in a leather jacket sitting across from another man. No action, no struggle. But everyone could feel something heavy in the air. The video spread. People argued. Some said, "That's intimidation." Others said, "That's protection." Others asked, "Where's the law?" Emily watched the video once, then turned it off. She didn't need to argue. She knew exactly where she had been standing and what had not happened because of that night. One question appeared repeatedly in the comments. What if this were illegal? Emily thought about that for a long time, and then she realized something. The law exists to deal with what has already happened, But fear exists long before that. And between those two things, there is a gap, a space where people must decide whether they will step forward or not. 1 year later, Emily got married. A small wedding, nothing elaborate. Jack didn't attend, but he sent a concise message. Congratulations. Live peacefully. Emily read that message for a long time, not because she was overwhelmed with emotion, but because she understood some people pass through our lives without staying, but their footprints remain. Emily gave birth to her first son on a tranquil morning. Holding the baby in her arms, she thought of something she had never thought before. I want my child to grow up in a world where people believe each other just a little sooner. Not unquestioning belief, but belief in the signs, belief in intuition, belief in protecting before rescue is needed. This story, seen from far away, might seem like just a moment. One night, one diner, one whisper. But seen up close, it is a story about many people. People who were afraid but did not believe. People who saw danger but didn't know what to do. And people who chose to stay when they could have walked away. There is a sentence Emily often says at the end of a counseling session. You don't have to prove your fear for it to be valid. Because if you have to wait for proof, then very likely that proof is a tragedy. There is a truth few people ever say out loud. Most tragedies do not begin with violence. They start with silence. The silence of someone afraid but not believed. The silence of someone who sees danger but doesn't want to get involved. The silence of an entire system that only reacts when it is already too late. And that is what remains after Emily's story ends. When the short video from that night spread, people didn't just talk about the biker. They spoke of the law, about the line between right and wrong, about who has the right to intervene and who does not. But very few people asked the most important question of all. If no one had stepped in that night, what would we have called the outcome? An accident? A tragedy? Or simply bad luck? Emily read hundreds of comments. Some called Jack a hero. Some said he was another danger. Some said Emily should never have made a big deal out of it. Emily didn't respond because she understood this. Someone who has never lived inside that fear will never truly understand what you had to weigh in that whispered moment. She remembers that feeling very clearly. Not the moment of facing the stalker, but the moment before opening her mouth. The moment when you ask yourself, if I speak up, will anyone believe me? If I stay silent, will I still have a chance to speak tomorrow? That is the moment when so many people have chosen silence, not because they were weak, but because they were taught that their fear was not valuable enough. Emily doesn't think she was brave. She only feels that night, silence had become more dangerous than speaking. And that is something many people only realize after everything has already happened. Jack sees the story differently. He doesn't care what people choose to call what happened. For him, there is only one question. If that night it had been my sister, would I have accepted turning away? The answer is always no. Not because he is stronger than others, but because he has lived with the feeling of arriving too late. Jack once told a friend at the club, I don't believe in saving people. I believe in getting there earlier. Getting there before things cross the legal line, before violence is given a name, while there is still a chance to change direction. Some people ask, if everyone did that, what would society become? It's a fair question, and a difficult one. But perhaps what's more frightening is a society where no one dares to act until there is already a victim. Emily meets many people who are just like she once was. They come to the organization where she works with the same sentence. I don't know if this is serious enough to report. She always answers softly. If it makes you feel unsafe, then it already deserves to be heard. Not every story has bikers. Not every story has a good ending. But every story begins with being believed. One woman once asked Emily, "Do you think if I had spoken sooner, things would have been different?" Emily was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I think the biggest difference isn't whether you speak early or late, but whether someone stays." This story, if it ended at a diner, would be easy to forget. But it didn't end there. It spread through small conversations, through more cautious glances, through people deciding not to turn away when something doesn't feel right. One man once emailed Emily. He wrote, "I saw a girl being followed in a supermarket parking lot. Before, I would have thought it wasn't my business. But I stayed. I just stood nearby, and the other person left." Emily read that email 3 times, not because it was dramatic, but because it was enough. Sometimes, presence alone changes the outcome. Emily's story doesn't ask you to become a hero. It doesn't demand confrontation or recklessness. It only sets a minimal standard, but a very difficult one. Don't turn away too quickly. Don't pretend you didn't see. Don't rush to believe someone is overreacting, because very likely the person standing in front of you thought for a very long time before daring to speak. There is one question that Deep Life Tales always wants to leave with its audience. If today you are the only one who sees, what will you do? There is no single correct answer for everyone, but there is one answer that many people regret choosing. Silence. Emily sometimes returns to Maple Road Diner. She sits in the corner, drinks her coffee, watches the neon lights flicker. She no longer thinks about the stalker. She thinks about the moment she stepped toward table 7. One tiny step that changed the direction of an entire life. Jack continues to pass through small towns. He still stops at roadside diners, not to look for trouble, but to make sure that if someone needs to speak, there will be someone willing to listen. There is something straightforward to overlook when people finish watching a story like this. They often think, good for her. It's fortunate someone showed up at the right moment. Then they close the video and return to their own lives. But if you pause just a little longer, you'll notice another truth. Emily is not a rare case. Emily is simply someone who managed to speak up. There are many other Emilys. People who never whispered, or who did whisper, but no one listened. People followed in parking lots, on late trains, in apartment hallways. They don't make the news. There's no viral video. No biker stands up. Only nights that feel longer than usual and footsteps that are always faster than necessary. Emily understood this clearly after her story spread. She received messages from strangers. Not long, not eloquent, just very short lines. I thought I was the only one. I went through the same thing. I stayed silent, and I regret it. Emily read every message. She didn't reply to all of them. She didn't know how, because she understood what they needed wasn't advice. They needed acknowledgement. One woman wrote to Emily, I wasn't attacked, but I moved 3 times out of fear. People said I was overreacting. Watching your story, for the first time, I felt like I wasn't crazy. Emily finished reading and had to close her laptop, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she realized the greatest fear people carry is not being harmed. It is being harmed, and then being told it didn't matter. There is one question that keeps returning to Emily's mind. What if Jack hadn't been there that night? She doesn't dare think further, Not because the outcome would undoubtedly have been bad, but because no one knows. And that not knowing is precisely what forces so many people to live in prolonged tension. Jack once said something to Emily during one of the rare times they spoke at length. No one knows exactly when something bad will happen, but anyone who has witnessed it knows what it looks like before it does. Emily understands that sentence in her own way, because she lived in the before. There is something society rarely teaches us. We are taught how to respond to tragedy, but we are seldom taught how to recognize danger while it is still legal, when everything can still be explained as a coincidence, when behavior can still be defended as a misunderstanding, when fear is still dismissed as being too sensitive. Emily realized this is the gray zone where so many people are left behind. Later, when working with victims, Emily doesn't ask first, "What happened?" She asks, "When did you start feeling unsafe?" It sounds like a gentle question, but it opens many doors, because most people remember very clearly the first moment their instincts spoke up. They've learned not to trust it. One man once came to see Emily. He wasn't a victim. He was a witness. He told her that months earlier he had seen a man following a woman in a hospital parking lot. He stopped, hesitated, then walked away. Not out of malice, but because he didn't want to misunderstand. A few weeks later, he read about an assault that happened in that exact place. He told Emily, "I don't know if it was the same person, but I know one thing. I saw something that wasn't right, and I did nothing." Emily didn't blame him. She only said, "Next time, just staying a little longer already makes a difference." Emily's story is not a call for reckless action. It doesn't say you must confront, must intervene directly, must be a hero. It reminds us of just one thing, very simple, yet very difficult. Don't ignore the feeling that something isn't right, in yourself and in others. There is an uncomfortable truth. Many dangerous behaviors were completely legal until there was a victim. The law is written to deal with what has already happened, but communal ethics exist to prevent it from happening. And those two things do not always move together. Emily doesn't believe everyone is responsible for saving others, but she does believe everyone is capable of not looking away. Sometimes all it takes is a direct look, a simple question, a presence that lasts long enough. These things don't appear in law books, but they appear in the stories that never became tragedies. If you ask Emily what was the most important thing was that she learned from that night, she won't talk about Jack. She won't talk about the bikers. She won't talk about the confrontation. She'll say, "Silence isn't always safe, and speaking up isn't always a weakness." If you pay attention, this story doesn't end with a grand victory. No villain publicly punished, no lesson neatly delivered. Only many people beginning to look at the world one beat slower. And sometimes, that single beat is all that's needed. If tonight you see someone walking faster than usual, if you notice a worried look without knowing why, if you encounter a situation that makes you hesitate about whether to stop or not, remember Emily, not because she is the main character, but because she represents countless people waiting for someone slow enough to truly see them. There are some stories that, when they end, make people ask, "So what happened next?" But there are other stories that, when they close, leave behind a quieter question. If it were me, what would I do? Emily's story belongs to the second kind, because what makes it stay is not the bikers, not the confrontation, not the dramatic moment. It is a tiny choice made in silence, a whisper, one person who stayed, and many others who did not turn away. We live in a world where everything moves very fast. News passes in seconds. Tragedy appears and disappears after a single scroll. But stories like this are not meant to be consumed quickly. They need to linger. They need to be thought about. They need to be carried beyond the screen. Emily did not become a symbol. She does not represent a movement. She does not stand on a stage or tell anyone how they must live. She is simply a person who survived and decided not to stay silent one more time. And that, more than any slogan, is what makes this story reach so many people. There is an uncomfortable truth that society rarely admits. Many people know something is wrong, but are unsure whether they have the right to speak up. We are taught not to interfere in other people's business, not to misunderstand, not to overreact. And then we grow up in a world where many people are harmed right inside that "don't overreact." Emily's story does not tell you to be braver than you are capable of being. It does not ask you to confront danger. It whispers something very different. When you see fear, don't rush to doubt it. Not every fear is correct, but many fears were right for a long time before anyone was willing to believe them. Perhaps the most important thing this story leaves behind is not a lesson about bad people, but a lesson about good people. People who stayed. People who didn't need a personal reason to care. People who didn't wait for the law's permission before acting with humanity. Jack is not a hero. He doesn't want to be one. He is simply someone who has seen what happens when terrible things unfold because everyone was one beat too late. And he chose not to let that beat repeat itself right in front of him. Emily doesn't believe she is stronger than anyone else. She only knows that if she hadn't spoken that night, she would have lived the rest of her life with the question, what if I had? And sometimes, people don't speak up not because they aren't afraid, but because they are afraid of living with that question forever. This story does not take sides. It does not oppose the law. It does not encourage crossing lines. It simply points to something very real, the gap between what people feel and what systems accept. And in that gap, only human beings can meet each other to fill it. There is something Deep Life Tales has always believed, even when it isn't said out loud. Humanity does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be timely. Timely enough to stay. Timely enough to ask a question. Timely enough not to turn away. If you've watched this far, perhaps you weren't looking for something sensational. Perhaps you were looking for something slower, more real, and closer to your own life. And if so, then perhaps this story has done what it needed to do. None of us knows where we will stand in the following story. You might be Emily. You might be the witness. You might be the only person who notices that something isn't right. The only thing you can choose is how you respond. There is one very short sentence Emily wrote at the end of her notebook after everything. The world does not become safer when we stay silent. It only becomes quieter. And that quiet, sometimes, is the most dangerous thing of all. There is a very particular moment after a story ends. Not when the screen goes dark, not when the background music fades out, but the moment when you are still sitting there and haven't rushed to do anything yet. The moment when the story is no longer on the screen, but has quietly stepped toward you. If you are here reading these lines, you may have already realized this. This story is no longer about Emily, and it is no longer about Jack. It is asking you. We are very used to watching others choose. watching them be brave, watching them speak up, watching them stay, and telling ourselves, if it were me, I'd probably do the same. But life rarely asks the question in such a clear way. It doesn't ask you when you are ready. It asks you in tiny moments, very ambiguous moments, and very easy to miss moments. Like when you see a woman change seats on the bus because someone is standing too close. Like when you see a girl pretend to be on the phone so that she doesn't have to walk alone. Like when you see a situation that makes you think, something isn't right, and then you reassure yourself, I'm probably overthinking it. Emily's story didn't begin in a moment of violence. It started long before that, when everything could still be explained, when every behavior was still unclear enough, when fear was still called a hunch. And that is precisely when most of us turn away. Not because we are bad people, but because we were taught that intervening is trouble. It's best not to get involved. That if something were serious, someone else would handle it. But this story exists because there was no someone else. Only specific people stand before particular choices. Emily didn't know who Jack was when she walked to table 7. She didn't know if he could be trusted. She didn't know how he would react. She knew only one thing. If I don't speak now, I will have to protect my own fear all over again. And there are moments when a person no longer has the strength to do that one more time. Jack didn't know whether he was doing the absolute right thing. He had no procedure, no script, no guarantees. He only knew a feeling. He knew very well. The feeling when things are slipping, and if no one stays, they will fall. Perhaps what makes this story uncomfortable for some people is that it doesn't give us a safe position. It doesn't let you sit comfortably in the role of the good person. It forces you to ask yourself, if I were there, what would I do? And that question does not have a comfortable answer. Because if you answer that you would stay, you must face the risk. If you answer that you would turn away, you must face your conscience. There is no completely light choice. And that is why so many people choose not to choose. But there is one thing this story says very clearly, without ever raising its voice. Not choosing is also a choice. And sometimes it is the choice to let things continue by inertia. Emily did not become a symbol because she was perfect. She became a symbol because she was ordinary, a young person, an ordinary job, a very familiar fear. If this story only happened to exceptional people, we wouldn't need to tell it. But it happened to people like you, and perhaps to you. There is a truth. Very few people say aloud, most people who are harmed have already tried to protect themselves before anything happened. They avoided. They changed routes. They stayed silent. They doubted themselves. And when they finally speak up, what they need most is not the question, where's the evidence, but rather, are you okay? Emily's story doesn't ask you to become the one who fixes things. It suggests a different role instead. More modest, but far more critical. The one who doesn't look away. The one who stays long enough. The one who looks closely enough. The one who doesn't rush to dismiss another person's fear. Maybe you don't say anything. You stand a little closer. Maybe you ask a straightforward question. Do you need help? You could stay present, but sometimes that is enough to change the trajectory of a night. This story doesn't guarantee that if you stay, everything will turn out fine. But it gives you something else. The chance not to live with the question, what if? And for many people, that is worth more than any praise. When Deep Life Tales tells stories like this, we don't expect you to remember every detail. We only hope that one day, in a very ordinary moment, you slow down by one beat. And in that slowed beat, you realize you are standing before a choice. You may not remember Emily. You may not remember Jack. You may not remember the roadside diner. But you will remember this feeling. The feeling that I can't pretend I didn't see. And if that happens, then this story has fulfilled its purpose. We cannot prevent every tragedy. We cannot protect everyone. But we can make this world a little less lonely in its most dangerous moments. Sometimes that is all a person needs. Some stories end with loud sounds, sirens, applause, declarations that everything is over. But there are also stories that end in silence, not because they lack climax, but because nothing more is needed. This story belongs to that kind. After everything that happened, no moment could be called a victory. No one stood up to take credit. No villain was named before a crowd. No ending that let people exhale in relief. There was only one thing, straightforward. One person who was no longer afraid to step out into the dark. And sometimes, that is the best ending a story can have. Emily did not wake up one morning feeling like she had been rescued. She woke up with the feeling that she was allowed to keep living. Living without calculating every step, living without listening to every sound, living without wondering whether her fear was valid. Those changes were not loud. No one but her noticed them at first. But those quiet changes were what reshaped an entire life. Jack didn't leave that town thinking he had done something extraordinary either. He returned to his everyday life as if things had gone the way they always should have. Because to him, not turning away was never something worthy of praise. It was simply what needed to be done. If someone asked what really changed after that night, the answer probably wouldn't lie in what happened inside the diner. It would lie in what did not happen. No cries for help in the parking lot, no brief headline in the morning paper. No additional person is forced to learn how to live with trauma. Those things that never happened are the most precious part of this story. We usually tell stories through what we can see, but real life is shaped by the things that were stopped in time, and very rarely are those things mentioned. What makes this story unforgettable is not that it is extraordinary, but it is familiar. So familiar that many of us have stood in one of those positions before. The one who was afraid but unsure whether they had the right to be. The one who sensed something wasn't right but didn't know whether to intervene. The one who turned away and later asked, "What if I had stayed?" This story does not condemn you for the times you turned away. It simply invites you to look back at those moments with a different gaze. Gentler, more honest. Be more truthful with yourself. We cannot fix the past. We cannot stay everywhere. We cannot protect everyone. But we can do better from this moment forward. Not through grand actions, but through small choices made just a little earlier. Maybe it means not laughing it off when someone says they feel unsafe. Perhaps it means not rushing to conclude that someone else is overreacting. Perhaps it means staying a few seconds longer, looking a little more closely, and asking yourself, if I were them, what would I hope for? Emily once wrote a concise line at the end of her notebook after everything had settled. I don't need anyone to save me from the world. I need the world not to turn its back on me. Those words were not meant only for her. They were meant for many people whose names we will never know. That may be the final message this story wants to leave behind. Not that you must become the one who fixes everything, but this. Sometimes, simply not walking away is already protection. When the screen goes dark, your life will continue. You will return to your work, to familiar roads, to familiar faces. But somewhere within those familiar things, there may come a moment when you feel that something isn't right, not clear, not certain, not big enough to name, just a feeling. And when that moment comes, this story will not tell you what to do. It will simply be there, like a hushed whisper. Don't turn away too quickly. If you choose to stay, no one may notice. No one may thank you. There may be no clear resolution. But one thing may very well happen. Another story will never need to be told. And sometimes that is the most tremendous success one human being can give another. This story ends here, not with certainty, but with a reminder. Not that the world will become safe overnight, but we can make it a little less lonely in its most dangerous moments. Deep Life Tales doesn't tell stories for you to forget in a few minutes. We tell stories for you to carry with you into the most real moments of your life. If you've walked with this story all the way to the end, perhaps you believe that too. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Not for a channel, but for stories that might help someone not walk through the darkness alone. We'll meet again in another story, and perhaps in the very moment you choose to stay.